Okay, well, we can get started. Uh, so, good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's session. A couple of quick things before we start. You see Mark there. Uh, it looks like he's not moving, but rest assured, he's alive and kicking and moving around. We had a little bit of a tech issue, so his camera is not quite functioning right, but at least his audio is fine, which is what we need to be able to hear him. So that's what's going on the screen. As usual, we'll take comments and questions using the Q&A box, and I'll relay them like I've been doing. And the only other thing that I want to mention is that we've got a program coming up, a series starting next week, poetry seminar series with our friend Judson Scruton. And we're doing something new for the first time, which is that we'll have people in person at the library in the audience. Judson will be on a screen remotely from North Carolina, and we will have other people who are watching and attending the program through Zoom. So it's a hybrid program. So please feel free to sign up. It's on the library's website, and you'll see when you sign up, there's a little button that you check for whether you're going to be in person or if you're going to be online. So we're pretty excited. We haven't done this before. It's a little bit of an experiment, but it should be quite fun, and hope to see you there. So with all of that, I'll turn it over to Mark. And like I said, don't worry about him not moving around. He is, and we'll just listen. Mark.
Thank you. As always, Michael, thank you for this invitation. Thank you for the help. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I could not access Gmail or this meeting on my laptop. I'm doing it from my phone. I will be able to hear you. I could hear Michael. You can hear me. Yes, Michael, I'm still audible?
Yep.
Okay. So good evening, everybody. I'm going to propose that we think of tonight not just as the fourth of six plays, but the second half of two three-part sections. This play, first performed in 1777 to great success and has always had high acclaim, is by Richard Brinsley Sheridan, whose dates are 1751, so almost exactly the middle of the 18th century, to 1816. That is into the period of time that people like Keats and Shelley and Byron and Wordsworth and Coleridge were writing. So he is a late 18th century figure and is held in very high regard. Born in Dublin, died in London, and several plays of which this is considered his most successful. When I say I want to talk about these next three plays as the second half, one of the things that's happened in School for Scandal, and we'll see it again in The Importance of Being Earnest, and even more extremely in Noises Off, is that these plays, all three of them, are partly self-conscious plays. Noises Off is about a play within a play. The Importance of Being Earnest has characters acting as if they know they're in a play. And one thing to understand about The Importance of Being Earnest is when those characters are being over the top or witty or tongue-in-cheek, you have to understand that the actual characters are playing it straight. Lady Bracknell does not know she's saying funny things, which is what makes it so funny. And there's an artificialness to it that's intentional on Oscar Wilde's part, because he believes these comedies of manners, that's what tonight's play and next time play, making fun of people of a certain class, a certain station, a certain self-consciousness. Six different characters in this play, most of the major characters, are either sirs or ladies. And these are people who are truly the idle rich. One of the reasons they have the bandwidth to use gossip as a pastime, led by Lady Sneerwell, is that they have time on their hands. So when you have a play in which characters are called Sneerwell and Snake and Crabtree and Candor and Lady Teazle and other names, you have to understand that the characters aren't aware of the humor in a name like Sneerwell, but we are. And these are people moving in a world where their names reveal something about their character. That is to say, it's an artificial play that's partly celebrating the artifice. Think of it. Well, let me say this first. There are references, and you may have different editions, to the moneylender as a Jew, as a kind Jew, as an old Jew. There are different versions of the text approved by Sheridan at different points in his revising process, some more anti-Semitic than others. It is true that in 18th century England, like many countries and time periods in Europe, Jews were moneylenders because Christians thought it was beneath them to deal in money. And it may not be true that just because a moneylender is a Jew in a particular story, that in and of itself is anti-Semitic. But references to a person as a Jew instead of by his name is certainly bordering on anti-Semitic. And I just want it to be known that I'm not unaware of that. Mr. Moses is referred to more than once as a Jew. This is true of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice and so on. So what are some of the characteristics of this comedy of manners, besides the obvious fact that names are being given to, in extreme cases, for comic effect? One is that there are a number of wards, young people who are under the moral oversight of somebody not necessarily a relative, and certainly not their mother and father. We will see wards in The Importance of Being Earnest. This is a device in Comedies of Manners because it gives you two generations, the way that Maria is a ward of Sir Joseph, without that person being a mother or father. So you get out of the parental genetic pool. Oliver Surface is an uncle to the two brothers, so he's in the same gene pool, but he's not a dad. And that gives a lot more flexibility. It allows the generational conflict. Remember, comedies are about social roles of people, not biological roles, tend to be more about people in their social interactions. And it is a social relationship to be someone's ward. It is not a social relationship to be their son or daughter. So there's a whole issue of awards. There's the idea of the idle rich having time to use gossip as pastime. Now, of course, they also have to be ill-willed, but with a name like Sneerwell, you're not surprised that people are ill-willed. Gossip, Gossip, you may not know, comes from the word God sib. Your God siblings, Godsib, are the people you care to know about. You want to keep tabs on your God siblings, your God children, because that's what you've agreed to when you become a godparent. And so it used to be that your God sibs were the people you want to know about because you were charged, sometimes with a religious imperative, to mind the morals of these young people. This gossip has degenerated into not just talking about what people know, but making things up. And that's part of the great machinery of the play. It also uses a device that we've seen in other romantic comedies over the course of our reading, not just now, but in general. You have the circular idea that Lady Teazle is interested in pursuing Joseph, and Joseph is interested in pursuing Maria, and Maria is interested in pursuing Charles, and so on. You also have the theme of doubleness. There are two sons, Joseph and Charles. One of them is thought to be a paragon of virtue, that's Joseph. The other one is thought to be less reputable, mainly because people know that he's in debt. And one of the nice things about the play is that although he hopes to reform through his marriage to Maria, he's not going to change his negative ways in terms of drinking and gambling. He may still be poor, relatively speaking, but he's not a bad person. He's not a dishonest man. So two brothers, two money lenders. Sir Oliver pretends to be two different people. One, someone premium who can give money. One, Stanley, an imagined relation who needs money. When Charles acquits himself from his uncle's disapprobation, he does it by doing two things. He refuses to sell the uncle's portrait, even though he sold all the others, out of respect for his uncle. And his uncle is there when that happens. He just doesn't know that he's there. And the other thing he does is he sends money with Rowley for Mr. Stanley, the poor relations. I want to pause on that for a moment because it's a very well constructed play. If the only thing he did to get back into Oliver's good graces is not to sell his uncle's picture, we could say that that feeds, and he doesn't know his uncle is there. He doesn't know that he's president. We could say that that just suits the ego of Sir Oliver. We could say that that's not love, that's not respect, that's not goodness. That's just that he's vain. But Charles also does an act of kindness and gives money when he doesn't have a lot to a relative he's never met. That's the doubleness again. So two roles of pretend by Oliver, Premium, and Stanley, two reasons why Charles gets back into two graces. And of course, drama is centered on doubleness. Things are not what they seem. First and foremost, this person saying that he's Sir Peter Teazle is not. He's an actor. And this being a drawing room is not a drawing room. And so comedy, as I mentioned, I think in our first or second meeting, is more likely to make people in the theater aware that this is a comedy. If you did not get a chance ever to see this play in performance, one of the things we miss necessarily when we read it, although if you're a good reader of plays and can kind of direct them in your mind, you may be able to approximate it, is this play is filled with perfectly timed exits and entrances. Someone says something and leaves, and someone else comes in. And seeing them walk onto the space of the room as the other person is leaving gives you the sense of this quick-paced connectedness between cause and effect or opposition. Someone says something, that person leaves, someone else comes and says something else. More than once in the play, somebody throws somebody out of their house, and that's much easier to experience if you're watching the house that they're being thrown out of. The play ends with the Teazles reconciled. They were going to separate. They still cared about each other. He confesses to Peter that he's fond of his wife, even when they argue. She is from the country. She has expensive tastes. He has a sore spot for her, but he puts his foot down. They separate for a short time. He tells her he will be generous in her support and that after his death, she's much younger than he is. She will get the bulk of his inheritance or the whole of his inheritance, and they are reconciled. So one happy ending is that that leading couple, the couple listed first in the cast, they are reconciled. The other is, of course, that Maria, who is sweet on Charles, but doesn't accept his proposal because she has believed the false rumors about his dalliances with Lady Teazle, that gets repaired. Sir Oliver is reconciled to the true nature of his two nephews. Remember, he's been out of the country for 16 years, but apparently he's been keeping tabs in one way or another. And he manages to see Charles in a new light because of what I've just said about his two actions, not selling the portrait and giving alms to a relative he's never met. And the uncle has a better assessment of Joseph. Along the way, the play has the screen device again of people hiding behind a screen. When there are too many people behind the screen, somebody hides in a closet. I ask you to sit for a moment and think, how many times in your life have you ever, for good or bad reasons, pretended in person to be somebody that you're not? Have you ever presented yourself, either through a use of disguise or makeup, or without any makeup or disguise, because you're meeting someone who doesn't know you're not you? How rare is that any of us have occasion, for good or possibly self-serving purposes, to make ourselves someone we're not. It's a mainstay of comedy. It's one of the great plays on appearances and reality. And again, whether someone does it for a noble reason or a self-serving reason, it happens all the time. On a continuum with that is the idea that someone puts themselves in a position, as they did in one of the earlier plays, to overhear what's happening without being seen. That is to put themselves in a position of an audience to a drama that is not actually artificially going on for their benefit. The people who are talking on the other side of the screen typically don't know that they're being heard. So there's another level of artifice. In among these characters with these punning and typically negative names, Raleigh is probably someone who could start a row. Bumper might be someone who is a very big or country bumpkin kind of guy. A bumper crop is a very large crop. It's possible that he's called Bumper because he has a physical presence that's imposing or frightening. But in the midst of all these telltale names, we have Maria, the name of the Virgin Mary, one of the most common names in Western civilization, some version of Maria. And she is only Maria. It's the name of the character in West Side Story. It's the name of many characters in plays and novels who bear something of the cachet of the Madonna. And although Maria is not given a lot of character development, she's an heiress. She is a respectful ward. She knows enough to know not to get involved with Joseph, and she's drawn to Charles by a kind of instinct. And when she has a chance to become betrothed to Charles, she refuses him because she thinks he's tainted goods. She's a heroic figure in a play that's not really interested in heroism. So all these things are to say that with people pretending to be people they're not, people believing the deception. Remember, the nephews haven't seen their uncle in 16 years. Presumably, that's most of their lives. With people crowding behind screens, with people making up scandals just for their entertainment. It's a play that is hard to accept as slice of life, and Sheridan wouldn't expect you to. It's meant to be a play that is partly about playing, playfulness, play acting. And this is a good example of any play I can think of, including the importance of being earnest, for that notion of the playfulness of the play. So I'm going to stop there for a moment and ask if any of you have questions or comments. I'm always interested in people who have recently seen or know the play well, who have some insight to offer, or especially if you can say something, as I've asked in previous meetings, about how you're reacting to the play as a reader, as someone who is a literature student. So, Michael?
Yep. So you know the drill, folks. Please use the Q&A to put any comments or questions in there. I will say that when I started to read the play just on paper, I was at the beginning. I was finding it a little hard to visualize what was happening because I think there's a lot of very fast motion to kind of visualize in your mind. And so I started looking for a recording. But what I found, which people can look up, find it very easily, was there is a recording. It's only the audio, but a recording of a Broadway performance of this play, starring and directed by John Gielgud, and also starring Richardson. And it's the full cast performing the play, but you just only have the audio. But once I started on that, it just flowed very well, and the jokes are funny, and it was very enjoyable.
We should also mention Benjamin Backbite as another telling name. Backbite, Sneerwell, Candor. Candor doesn't mean honest. It means without a filter.
Oh, since you mentioned Mrs. Candor, another factoid that I came across in just poking around about it was apparently at a private performance at a house sometime in the early 1800s. The part of Mrs. Candor was performed by Jane Austen.
Is that right?
Yep. Well, I haven't had a chance to verify that independently, but I came across that in a couple of places.
Michael, I want to believe you. I
Yep.
believe you. That's something. You know, I'll say this, one of the chief entertainments among men in the 18th century was card playing. And if you've ever seen Stanley Kubrick's magnificent movie, Barry Lyndon, you will see how often people play cards, especially men. But another kind of entertainment were musicales in people's homes, and not just the extremely wealthy. Upper middle class people would often have musical performances, dances also, but musical performances. But another thing that they did is they did either dramatic readings from something that was part of a play, or that could be read as a dramatic reading, like a passage from the Iliad. And they put on what is called closet dramas, which were popular in the late 18th, early 19th century. They were plays written by authors who did not intended them to be performed. They were not meant to be on stage. They were meant to be done in a little room. And because the 18th century did not have electric lighting, because there were lots of modern, even 19th century modern kinds of entertainment that they did not have, they were eager for the kinds of entertainment that would let them be social within someone's home. Very common.
Okay, we got a couple of comments. One, Paul says that there's a terrific online performance by the Guthrie Theater Group, and their rendition of the screen scene is truly hilarious. Maybe the best screen scene ever.
Who said that? Who
Paul.
gave us? Paul?
Paul.
Thanks for reminding me of that. I have seen that back in the day, that screen scene. Thank you for that reminder. Yes.
And an anonymous person has said, besides being funny, can you talk about some of the serious messages in the play?
Yeah. Well, I want to say I don't think there are a lot of serious messages in the play. I think one of the things about comedy in general is its anti-message. Um, uh, the subtitle of The Importance of Being Earnest is something like a serious play for trivial people or vice versa. That is, these wits pride themselves on being frothy. It's not to say that we cannot take a moral from the play. Certainly, the play ends with the moral that eventually scandal will die out. But of course, it requires people to be quiet and not pass on scandal. Remember, the point is made in the play that it's not just making up stories, but spreading them. And so I do think that you can derive from the play the moral that you should be more earnest. That's a word that came into great use in the 19th century, in the Victorian period, because the moral sobriety of the Victorians, the idea of being respectable in all things, and certainly in public life, led to the exaggeration of earnestness as the Victorian way, the kind of stiff upper lip and being serious. And Oscar Wilde, who was not only a wit, but a homosexual, not known to the public at large, but certainly known within his artistic and intellectual circle, is having a great deal of fun in that play, making fun not just of the comedy of manners, but of heterosexuality and other kinds of normative behavior. So I do think it's possible to understand that the play is saying that Charles is worthy of being loved by his uncle because he's done two good things. But I would hesitate, I personally, saying that that's a message of the play. I don't think that's a message in the play. I think the play means to have a very good time, I think it means to stay within the boundaries of good taste. So although it does, like most comedies of the kind we're looking at, play on the notion of sexual promiscuity, this is another play that is more about falling in love or being attracted to someone than the kind of sincere love that we saw in Twelfth Night, which remains the high watermark. There is no serious personal, moral, emotional love in The Importance of Being Earnest, and even less in Noises Off, which is a different kind of play. Earnest is a high watermark of a play that's going out of its way not to have a moral.
Okay. A quick note just on that production online that you can look at. If you just go to YouTube and you put in Guthrie, which is Guthrie, school, and then the word scandal, it comes up pretty near the top of the search results for that production.
Michael, I'm going to step away for just 3 minutes, and please, if you have nothing to fill the time with, see if you get more comments and questions. I will be right back.
Okay, yeah, we got a couple more.
Thank you. Be right back.
Yep. Desmond's suggesting that we should all do Wordle while we're waiting for Mark to come back.
Thanks for your patience.
Okay, so Desmond's asking in his copy, which is Dover Thrift Editions, there are some additional long poems, one called A Portrait, written by Sheridan, and a prologue by Sheridan. There's also an epilogue spoken by Lady Teazle. And
Right.
he's asking, are these part of all the versions? Were they part of the performances?
So it's impossible for anybody, least of all me, to say whether it was part of all performances, but the prologue and certainly the epilogue read by Lady Teazle are part of the play as established. Very often these plays were first performed in a prominent theater in London, and very well-known actresses and actors were in the original productions, and it was considered a compliment to the playwright. It was considered an accomplishment of the playwright to write a good prologue or epilogue for one of those actors. And it was not uncommon for people who had no connection to the play. David Garrick was one of the great actors in 18th century England. More than once, he wrote a prologue to a play he didn't write, convinced without a lot of arm twisting the playwright to accept it, and then he would read it. And that was considered a great thing. I mean, imagine going to a play in which Laurence Olivier is not performing, but he comes out in the beginning and he reads a prologue, and you find out later that he wrote it. Yeah.
Okay. So Gene is asking or commenting, It struck me that Charles is only marginally less dissolute than his reputation suggests. The fact that he wouldn't let go of Sir Oliver's portrait seems pretty small compared to his other bad behavior, and yet he is redeemed at the end as a good guy, with a supposed promise of being redeemed by Maria.
Okay, that's a statement. Do you want to ask a question about what you just said?
No, that's just a comment that he made. If you want to react,
What do you have? A heart of stone? What's that man's name?
Gene.
Gene, Gene, is this Gene Laganta?
Yeah.
Gene, my friend. So I was just going to give you a little grief as a joke. He's not supposed to be someone who magically turns better. That would not be convincing. Maybe Maria will keep him on the path of virtue. Many men in drama and in real life have hope for that. What are his vices? He drinks too much, he gambles, he hangs out with friends, he wastes money. That's probably true of most of the people, of the males in his class, in his social class. I think Sheridan does a good thing not to have him be someone who has completely reformed. In The Importance of Being Earnest, someone can only get the woman he loves if his name is actually Earnest. He has a friend who is also in love with a woman who caught it like a kind of contagion. She also has decided that she needs to be a man whose name is Earnest, but she won't mind if he's only baptized Earnest. She's the B plot, she's the minor story. It's enough that he get baptized. But Jack, the lead in the play, Gwendolyn, his fiance, insists that his name be Earnest, and son of a gun, it works out. Wilde is making fun of the kind of play where things turn around. To Sheridan's credit, Charles is not a bad person, and he's not going to become a very good person. I think that's to the play's credit. Joseph, of course, is a terrible liar with respect to courting Maria, but flirting and maybe more than that, wanting more than that with Lady Teazle. He also lies to his uncle, and he is much more disreputable than Charles. And the play operates in the world where Charles is better by far than Joseph, even though he has vices, is because Maria marries him.
Got it. Okay, so Kate's got a question. I'm curious about how audiences in Sheridan's time would have viewed sentimental characters. Would they have disliked them as much as Shakespearean audiences disliked Puritans? How could you contrast what audiences found funny in those two time periods?
Yeah, well, so Kate, are you saying how they found sentimental characters? You don't mean in the play, you mean in other plays they've seen? Is that what you mean?
I think she means sentimental characters as a type of character in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, that's easy to answer in macrocosmic terms. As I mentioned when we did She Stoops to Conquer, London audiences were relieved that Goldsmith wrote what he called a laughing comedy, and that the standards of comedy changed both from the very vulgar and bawdy comedies in Restoration theater and the sentimental comedies, none of which we read because they're boring to the 21st century, 20th century, 19th century sensibility. People didn't like those sentimental plays. They were not only sentimental, they were trying to teach you to be a better person. And there was great relief in the middle to latter part of the century when comedies were actually laugh out loud funny. If the play did not strike you as funny in its linguistic play, in the way that, say, The Country Wife did, certainly if you were to see it in performance, it's very hard not to enjoy how witty the play is. You remember I told you when we did She Stoops to Conquer that you have to accept a lot of things as premises about dressing like a well-worn woman in the day and like a more comfortable woman at night. And this man has a condition where he is nervous around people of the upper class and so on. You have to allow all these what ifs, what ifs to enjoy the comedy. This is quite different. You don't have to take a leap of faith to think that Charles and Joseph are the people they are. Lady Teaswell, as a young country wife coming to the city and having access to a lot of money, is certainly believable in how she acts. Sir Joseph Sir Peter seems to be a very generous and patient man, an older husband who is not lascivious about his young wife. And I think people respect that these are believable characters within the confines of a comedy of manners. The people are acting the way they are because of their class. Actually, because of their rank. Class doesn't exist for another half century, but certainly rank. Jane Austen's comedies have characters who marry within their same rank. Jane Austen is writing her novels in the first years of the 19th century, but her novels are really in the sensibility, no pun intended, of the 18th century. That is, your rank is a station you got at birth. It's because of your parents, because of your breeding, your education, whether your parents have people, whether they have land, and that determines pretty much the rest of your life, and you're likely to die in the same rank you were born in. That's what it means to be in a rank. It's largely unchangeable, like caste in India. But class is the hallmark of the 19th century and Dickens novels and Bronte's and the Victorians. Jane Austen's not a Victorian. So they would not have missed sentimental characters, and they would have been relieved to go for a couple of hours in a theater and laugh at people who are almost certainly better than them. Yes, upper class people went to the theater, but the people who went to the theater mainly were the upper middle class, the people who aspired to be cultured.
Got it. At the moment, that's what we had for comments. So if you want to just continue on along some line.
Well, let me say, I don't want to waste your time, but I want to be profitable in saying things that'll matter. Michael, what time is it?
It is 20 to 8.
Okay, so I'm hoping if I say some more things, it'll not just fill the time, but occasion thoughts for you to ask comments or questions. So I don't want to miss the stress I want to put on these characters do not know they're in a comic play of manners that has some farce to it. But there is a way in which the play knows that it's being playful. That is, if it were to happen that a character appeared who was very ill, you could bet that he or she would not die. And because it's a comedy where people are defined by their social beings and their social relations, you don't have that one of the characters is mentally ill or has a cancer diagnosis. He has social vices like gambling, like drinking, like fibbing about his neighbors. That's the world of comedy. And it'd be a rare comedy where part of the plot is advanced by something of a biological nature, something about someone's actual physical presence, which is very common in dramas, in tragedies. So if you keep in mind this idea that this play, although it's not a farce like Noises Off, and it's not quite as arch as The Importance of Being Earnest, it's on that continuum. Be sensitive as you read Earnest, and if you can see a production of that, even better. And as always, if you can both read the play and see a production, and there are many film versions of it as a play and as a movie, it is a remarkably witty and clever play. And I will tell you, and this is not just to fill the time, I was hoping to have space to talk a little about The Importance of Being Earnest. Oscar Wilde writes that play in the last decade of the 19th century. The century began with people like Wordsworth and other romantic poets who believed that art came from writing about yourself. Wordsworth believed that he, as a poet, was typical democratically of your average person. Walt Whitman felt the same thing in America at mid-century. Walt Whitman wrote a poem called Song of Myself, which is not about him per se, it's about him as an example of you being you. And Song of Myself begins, I celebrate myself and sing myself and what I assume you shall assume. And it goes on for 52 sections, like the weeks in a year. He does not mean what I take for granted, you have to believe too. Walt Whitman was not a dictator. He meant, I'm going to assume my own selfhood. I'm going to spend 52 sections of this meandering poem being myself, and you should copy me by being yourself. You should be you. Wordsworth and Keats believed that human beings were in tune with nature as a race, and that it was possible to write about all people by writing about yourself. I have to stress, ladies and gentlemen, Shakespeare did not think that way. Homer did not think that way. John Milton did not think that way. They did not think that the stuff of selfhood would have been the stuff of communication. In fact, as a Puritan, John Milton would be suspicious of the self being the enemy of the soul. But the Romantics thought that the key to understanding, communicating with people was to be open to your own heart, because then other people would understand their reflection in you. I say all that because Oscar Wilde, God love him, wrote in an essay that art does not involve telling the truth. Any moron, he wrote, he might have said idiot, but something very close to this, can tell the truth. It takes an artist to lie well. It takes an artist to lie well. In the end of the century, during the art for art's sake movement, when there was a great interest in the fin de siècle about being over the top, overdressing, overposing, exaggerating emotions, and not just because Oscar Wilde was a closeted or semi-closeted gay man. Many artists and intellectuals, performers, believe that art was a celebration of creativity about what was not true, about being something other than what the hand you were dealt. And so he believes that the whole goal of art is to make something that is beautiful or witty or engaging and not true. You have enough truth in your life. It takes an artist to make the things that God did not make. So if you keep that in mind, the artificialness of the importance of being earnest is the heart of the play. Tolstoy, who writes Anna Karenina in the 1860s, is rumored to have said, I hope he did say it, that he looked around the world and he saw nothing like Anna Karenina. And so he made her. That is, he thought that his role as an artist was to supply something that God hadn't figured out yet. Many writers and artists of the 17th, 16th, 15th, 14th century believed that the role of an artist was to represent, to mimic what God had made and try to improve on it in terms of its human form. They would not have thought that they were being original in the way that 19th century writers thought of themselves as originating something. So when we move tonight from School for Scandal to the importance of being earnest, we are crossing not just into the 19th century, we're traveling forward over 100 years, from 1777 to the 1890s. Big leap. Any other comments, Michael?
Nope.
So I'll say something more about the importance of being earnest, only because I don't know that there's a puzzle to unknot or more explication to be made of this comedy of manners. If you keep in mind as you read or see the play that the lines that are funny are not meant to be funny by the people who are saying them, you will see that there are some instances where when one of the characters is discovered in a contradiction, he says has one name, and there's some evidence, some documentary evidence, some artifactual evidence of a cigarette case with a different name on it. When his fiance challenges him and wants him to explain the contradiction, she says, "Please give me your explanation and pray make it improbable." Now, that's a line that always gets a laugh in the theater because it's just what you don't expect. You expect that she wants to say, "I hope you'll tell me something plausible." Now, again, Gwendolyn does not say that because she's being funny. She's saying that because she's a serious character in Wilde's funny play. She says, "Make it improbable," because she's expecting that it will be improbable. Wilde has us say, "Make it improbable," because it will be more fun if it's improbable. Everybody in the theater wants his explanation to be improbable. The probable answer is boring. You want to hear the fantastic story. Another place in the play, that woman, Gwendolyn, and her sort of double, Cicely, at one point in the play, they say exactly the same lines at the same time. Completely improbable, but that's the way the play works. They can't understand what's going on. There's some argument between the two men. It's basically a four-character play, two couples. Lady Bracknell is important. There's some minor characters. They say at one point, "The suspense is unbearable. I hope it will last." And again, you say to yourself, well, is that character being comic? No, she's being dreadfully serious. Why? Because people like suspense. People go to suspense movies all the time. If you go to a suspenseful movie and the suspense doesn't last long enough, you're disappointed. You want to hold out for the excitement. That's why you watch thrillers or read sensational novels. They are saying it because in their empty lives of comedy of manners, they will enjoy a good story, a good drama, even if it's against their self-interest. That's the point of Wilde's humor, which is spoken by the characters, but not intended by them. I have to say that's a very big point because most people think that witty lines from characters are intended to be examples of their wit. Not so. I'm not sure I have too much more to say that will help people for next week. I am happy to take more comments or questions, but I don't just want to talk to fill the space.
Okay, here's another comment. Okay,
Okay. Who is this?
it's Gene. It's Gene chiming in again.
Thank you, Gene.
We've mentioned it before, but it strikes me how the plays we've done in this series, especially Country Wife, She Stoops, and School for Scandal, are so like 20th century screwball comedies. They are all about deception, misunderstanding, and hiding behind screens, among other things,
Yeah.
in these plays. The Wikipedia entry on screwball comedies makes a point about these comedies being offered in the 30s Depression to get people out of their doldrums, but basically the films seem to totally depend on these comedies.
Yeah. So let's take this in three parts. First of all, a comedy is just a work, plays in this case, that end well, that have resolutions. They're not intended necessarily to be laugh out loud funny. Jane Austen's novels are comedies, by and large, and I am an endless admirer of her talent. By and large, they are not laugh out loud funny the way Mark Twain is. They are witty and they keep a light mode. They keep the promise that although a character might suffer a migraine, no one in Jane Austen has an ulcer. No one is anxious. Anxiety hasn't been created yet. That's going to take the 19th century. People in the 18th century may be dyspeptic, they may have a sore tummy, but they're not going to be laid low by worry. They have a certain kind of comedy. But more broadly, a comedy is a play, a book, a story that ends with a marriage, because comedy is interested in social beings and it's interested in the generation of new lives. Lives get generated through sexual relations, and the plays being what they are, they can't show that, but they can show courtship or marriage. So, in general, comedies end with a marriage, with a wedding. Tragedies like Madame Bovary, like Therese Raquin, like Hedda Gabler, like Anna Karenina, they don't begin with they don't end with a marriage. They begin with a marriage, because those great tragic novelists want to say, you think a marriage solves a problem? Watch. And those writers, those European writers, are much more likely to write a story where the novel is the beginning of the tale and often the beginning of the tragedy, as opposed to the comedies that end. Jane Austen was willing to answer questions from her fans about what happened to Elizabeth Bennet and Darcy after they got married. And she would write to them and tell them how many children they had and what their names were, because Jane Austen loved her fans and she had a very fecund imagination. And she didn't have what today's novelists would think of is the hauteur to say, the novel's over. There is no novel after it ends. Jane Austen continued to think about her characters beyond the novel. So that's the second kind of comedy, the comedy that ends with a marriage or an upcoming marriage. But the third is a play, a novel that takes an attitude of esprit, of gaiety, of hopefulness about life. So Huckleberry Finn, which is a very dark novel in many ways, which has no romantic love in it, no promise of marriage or courtship. Huckleberry Finn is a comedy in the sense that the immediate problem, even though he's abused along the way, of Jim's freedom is resolved. Huck's father is confirmed dead. He's in a position to lead a good life as somebody in the culture of soap and civilization, and he will have none of it. And what he wants to do is what he wanted to do at the beginning of the novel. He wants to set out for the territories. He wants to go west, young man. And that's seen as a comic ending because his spirit, the youthful spirit of innate morality, he thinks that he's helping to steal property. And at one point in the novel, he sets down and writes a note to Jim's slave owning mistress to say, I'm sending Jim home. I know that what I've done is wrong. And then he thinks about it and he rips up the note and throws it into the river and says famously out loud, all right, I'll go to hell. That is, he thinks because his morality, his conscience has been malformed by the racist South, he thinks that the right thing to do is give this man back into bondage. This man who's been essentially a father to him, certainly a companion, who he has understood is a human being, who he came around to apologize to for abusing him with a joke. He thinks that it's wrong to help him get away. He thinks it's right to turn him in, but he's not going to do it even if he has to go to hell. That's an amazing statement, but that's the comic spirit of the novel, where Huck's natural instincts are more moral than the culture he was raised in. So that's another kind of comedy. We're doing stage comedies, and so the latter kind is not common in stage comedies, much more common in novels. Stage comedies tend to be of the kind we're looking at. And to continue Gene's point about screwball comedies, in the Depression, when there was also the issue of censorship, you could not have extended passages of people making out, of people being sexual in their conversation in the explicit way. So what replaced sexual flirtation and dalliance was that rapid fire kind of talking that you see with Cary Grant and other Rosalind Russell, His Girl Friday, where people are talking really quickly. And what they're doing is they're punning and making jokes. And that verbal wordplay becomes a substitute for foreplay. And the censors had to let it go because they're not talking dirty. They're not even talking suggestively the way the Marx Brothers do. They're just very witty and very fast. And people loved in the Depression that kind of escape where a marriage, a courtship, an ex-marriage, you have as many ex-wives as you have wives in those movies, is filled with vitality and not just worrying about legalities or headaches. They're wonderful movies.
That's great. So if you have time, to go from macro to micro is an interesting question from Desmond, where he says the oath egad, E-G-A-D, was used very frequently in School for Scandal. He noticed that in She Stoops, the term was spelled ECOD, E-C-O-D. Curious about the difference since the plays were written only a few years apart. Any ideas on that?
No ideas off the top of my head. Who asked that question?
Desmond.
Thank you, Desmond. I hope you don't think this sounds dismissive, but it'd be an easy thing to find out online with Wikipedia. I'm going to suggest EGAD probably came from Ye Gods, and that the editor or the writer who preferred ECOD wanted to get a little bit further away from the G sound of God. You may know that Jeepers Creepers is a euphemism for Jesus Christ. Jeepers Creepers. You may know that Jiminy Cricket was a euphemism for Jesus Christ. People would say Jiminy Cricket. You may have heard Scandinavian people say by Yiminy. It was a way of saying Jesus Christ without saying Jesus Christ. Jeepers Creepers, Jiminy Cricket. There's no accounting for how people will fudge a way to make a blasphemous expression not be blasphemous. Who was it who decided to put an H in Jesus H. Christ? But my Lord, it lasted for a long time.
Okay. Well, that's it for the questions and the comments, Mark. If you want to make a concluding comment and go on.
Are we near the top of the hour? I'm sorry, I don't have access to my
yeah. Oh, yes, we are. We're at 7:58.
Okay, well, very good. Let me say that I have a dear friend who was raised in the Midwest, and when she wanted to say the S word, she would say shoelaces. And when she said shoelaces, she said it with all the venom and flavor of the four-letter S word. It was great. She said shoelaces, but I was hearing something else. Yeah. Like when people say shut the front door, they don't mean shut the front door. They mean shut the blank up. But there you go. I want to thank Michael publicly for his helping calm me down when I was worried that I was going to have to miss this meeting. He's a good convener and a good friend to my visit, so thank you. I don't know, how many people did we have tonight?
At the peak, around 40-ish, a little more than 40.
So I want to thank you all for coming this evening. I suspect that some percentage of you have come to all of them or most of them. I want to urge you especially to come to The Importance of Being Earnest. I think it's a classic comedy. And Noises Off, much more recent, is a play that I hope if you come, you can also see it in performance. It is a play that's a play within a play and a farce within a farce that you will appreciate seeing at least partly dramatized. So thank you, Michael. Happy Halloween, everybody, if you're celebrating. And stay well. Stay well.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, everybody. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks for Oscar Wilde.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Stay safe.
Okay, good night, everybody.